Okay, I will turn it over to you to officially start the meeting, Amy.
Okay, good morning and welcome. It is officially 9 a.m. on October 17th, 2023. I am Amy Witzinger, Chair of TEA's Continuing Advisory Committee for Special Education. We're an advisory committee created to make recommendations to TEA, who then informs the Texas legislature. I'll cover more about our charges in a bit. If you are joining us today, we're glad you're here to participate and provide public comment. Our agenda, we will post on the screen. Later. If you have read it, you may notice that we're moving public comments ahead of our work session so that we may incorporate your ideas. If you wish to provide public comment, please tell me between 9 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. or 9:30 a.m. either by physically signing our clipboard or by making a request in the Zoom chat. So hope you plan your day. It looks like public comments will begin at about 9:30 and end by 10. Our agenda consists of committee guidelines, TEA staff updates, public comments, and a work session to review the last legislative report and plan for the next one. And we will approve the minutes, and then we'll plan our future meeting dates and topics. To review our CAC member duties. Number 1, advise TEA of unmet needs within the state of education of children with disabilities. Comment publicly on any rules or regulations proposed by the state regarding the education of children with disabilities. Advise TEA in developing evaluations and reporting on data to the Secretary under Section 618 of the Act. Advise TEA in developing corrective action plans to address findings identified in federal monitor reports under Part B of the Act. Advise TEA in developing and implementing policies relating to the coordination of services for children with disabilities. Advise TEA in setting standards related to significant disproportionality determination. The CAC is required to submit a report to the legislature biennially with recommended changes to state law and agency rules relating to special education. Next, Ms. Stephanie Cope will call the roll, and we will have member introductions to help our new members get acquainted with all of us.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I think we'll start out with new members. So when I call your name, if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and what role you're serving on the CAC. For example, some people are filling TWC or foster care, transition, parent, special ed director, whatever that role happens to be. So let's start out with Adrian.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Adrian Guerra. I live in Roma, Texas, which is in deep South Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I've been in education for about 26 years. I've been performing choir director, performing arts director, federal programs director, and currently serving as special education director for Roma ISD. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for everything you do. And it's great to be part of this great team. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Next, another new member we have is Tara. I believe Tara's in person.
Good morning. My name is Tara Cevallos, and I am fulfilling the role as a private school advisor. I am the principal at St. Austin Catholic School. I'm also a licensed dyslexia therapist. and a qualified instructor for therapy programs.
Thank you, Tara. So great to have you with us. Next, another new member is Janie, and I believe Janie is also there in person this morning.
Yes, good morning. I apologize, I can't get my camera on. But my name is Janie Melendez, and I am from the Rio Grande Valley, Hidalgo, Texas. And I'm a school teacher, and I'm currently teaching dyslexia.
Okay, great. Thank you, Janie. So nice to meet you. I'm glad you could make it in person this morning. Up next, our fourth new member is Kevin. Kevin, I think you're on with us virtually this morning.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Markle, and I'm with Texas Workforce Commission Vocational Rehab Division. I've been with the agency almost 20 years, and all of those years have been around our transition program and providing transition services to students with disabilities. So really excited to be a part of the group.
Thank you, Kevin. It's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. And next are our standing members. Claudia, would you like to introduce yourself next, please?
Good morning. I'm Claudia Cavazos. I am the principal at St. Clair of Assisi Catholic School, and I am glad to be here to help support our fellow Texans.
And she is also our secretary, so she will be taking notes for us during the meeting. So thank you for that. Aaron, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Bangor. I'm a user experience researcher at UT here in Austin, and I represent parents of children with disabilities on the committee. I serve as the vice chair of the committee, and recently was appointed to represent the committee on the advisory. Let me see if I can get this right. Advisory Committee on Basic Education for students with or persons with intellectual development disabilities. Really long time. Good to see all the new members as well as all your faces.
Thanks, Aaron. We appreciate that. Up next, April Estrada, Dr. Estrada.
Hi, I'm April Estrada. I'm the Director of Special Populations at Region 10 Education Service Center. And so we are in the Dallas area, and we have cover about 130 school districts and charters, like 1,200 campuses, and about 1 million students that we support in all things special ed, 504, mental health, nursing, all the special things. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, April. Diana, could you go next, please? You're on mute, Diana.
There we go. Good morning. My name is Deanna Nelson, and I represent students in state correctional facilities. I'm the special ed coordinator for the Texas Juvenile Justice Department.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here with us this morning. Joanne, would you mind going next, please?
Yes, good morning. My name's Joanne Wofford. I live in New Braunfels, Texas. I serve on the committee as a parent of now a young adult in his last year of adult transition services. I'm serving my second year term and will probably be my last. I'd like to have someone who have another parent serve on the committee who has a younger student. So happy to be here and to be part of this committee.
Thank you, Joanne. Agatha?
Good morning. My name is Agatha Thibodeau. I'm also serving on the committee as a parent. I have a 15-year-old with significant autism. I've been on the committee for about 6 years now, so this will be our fourth legislative report that we'll be working on. So I'm excited to meet all of you and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. And have I gotten everybody? Marissa.
Hi, my name is Marisa Esquivel, and I'm from Beeville, Texas, and I work at I'm a special ed director for St. Mary's Charter Academy. It's a charter school, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Nice to see you this morning. And that is everybody, Amy, except you. And I think you've introduced yourself already.
I didn't say what role I'm serving.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please do. Okay.
So I think I should at this point. I am your chair. I serve as a public policy specialist for a statewide nonprofit called Texas Parent to Parent that serves parents of children and adults with disabilities. And I am appointed to represent self-advocates on the committee as I went through Texas public school. Not quite that long ago, but long enough to be appointed to represent students as a former student. So I am happy that we have new members and that we're all going to participate in forming this report together. I'm happy that we'll have some new ideas.
Thanks, Amy.
Stephanie, would you like to continue with staff reports?
Yes, I can. Kristen is here and ready, so I can introduce Kristen and we can get the updates from TEA. Are you ready for that?
Sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Well, everybody, I would like to say good morning and have everybody welcome Kristen McGuire. She is here with us from TEA this morning. She is the Senior Director of Special Education Policy Programs and Reporting, and she is going to give us some TEA updates. So Kristen, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Amy. It's good to see you. It's good to see many familiar faces. Yes, as Stephanie said, I'm Kristen McGuire, and I work in the Special Populations Division here at TEA. So I have just a few things on my list as far as kind of what was on the agenda from I think what was potentially asked at a previous meeting to talk a little bit about Section 504 as well, assuming maybe just kind of a overall population, but you guys can tell me if you had specific questions that I can find out for you. But obviously, primarily, biggest update at this point is kind of waiting to see where our third special session heads, which direction that heads. So currently we have the Senate who has, passed two bills over to the House that are related to education, SB1 and SB2. SB1 is a education savings account bill for parents, and SB2 has primarily teacher pay raises among some other funding allotment changes. So those are the two that have been passed over to the House. So we are kind of in a wait and see mode as to what the House does with those particular bills. Your guess is as good as mine in terms of what continues as far as the conversation. Of course, there are still conversations happening about either a broader funding bill being filed, or potentially, more of the funding pieces added to SB2. So I think, I think special education funding is still a topic of conversation, potentially in a larger funding bill. But again, we just have to figure out between the House and the Senate and the governor what ultimately comes through, or whether they can reach some kind of resolution or potentially a fourth session called. So as far as of course, we're working on what's passed during the regular session. We have quite a few rules under the administrative code, under the commissioner rules, that need some updating, not only because of legislation, but just in terms of just kind of general changes in practice and things like that. So those are to come. And of course, we'll have some, stakeholder engagement around those potential and then ultimately proposed changes as well. Then we've got a couple of kind of major, well, not major, but two kind of larger things that came out of the session as well, as far as some actions required of the agency and then ultimately school districts. The biggest one, I think, is regarding HB3, which was that larger school safety and security bill. There's a provision in that bill that requires the agency to develop guidelines for students and staff with disabilities during emergencies or disasters. And so the agency needs to do that in consultation with various groups and various individuals. We are in the process of gathering that group together to start that consultative process before we ultimately issue those guidelines. And then the bill then requires districts to use those guidelines in their development and implementation of their own emergency operations plans. So that is what we are currently kind of working toward, hoping to have our first meeting for that particular group here within the next few weeks. So that is that will be continuous, at least for the next few months, until we get those to a good spot with guidelines. The other is materials associated with the Driving with Disability program. So a bill, Senate Bill 2304, passed to where ARD committees and Section 504 committees need to give information related to a program, the Driving with Disability program, which essentially allows a person, an individual with a disability, to indicate on their license or ID card that they have a disability that could impede communication with a peace officer. And so we, along with DPS and the Governor's Committee for People with Disabilities, will be working on development of materials for that. Fortunately, there are quite a few existing materials, so I think that will be a fairly easy task to make sure we get those materials in the hands of school districts and charter schools. So we'll working on those. And then, like I said, some rule changes. We've got rule changes ahead of us because of legislation, primarily because of House Bill 3928, which is related to dyslexia identification and instruction, and also Senate Bill 133, which is a bill prohibiting peace officers or security personnel from restraining a student under 5th grade unless there's kind of imminent harm to student or others. So we'll be working on some changes to our restraint and timeout bill or rules, excuse me, because of that legislation, the way it impacted or where it impacted statute requires some changes to our commissioner rules associated with that. So those kind of the biggest, I guess, sort of legislative updates and kind of where we're going. So we'll be, we'll be in touch about that. And then I think with 504, excuse me, I think with 504, I don't know if you guys at a previous meeting had some previous questions on it. I don't know, Stephanie, if you remember.
If I'm recalling correctly, I think those came from you, Aaron.
Yeah, I was about to jump on. I think in our last meeting, it was mentioned that in addition to the special education population data, starting in 2018, TA started collecting data about Section 504 in terms of number of students served, maybe the disabilities that were identified associated with that sort of thing. Was not as clear what the data was, but it was reported that the data had been started to be collected 5 years ago. In my notes, it says most students being served under 504 are with dyslexia, but I think the question was kind of a fuller understanding of what the 504 data have to offer so that we get a more complete picture.
So with section 504, we don't currently collect data based on the type of impairment that is identified, with the exception of dyslexia, only because there's a separate, data collection for the identification of dyslexia. And with that data collection comes with, essentially kind of a sub collection of whether the student is served under 504 or special education services. So with 504, we do collect whether they do have a 504 accommodation plan. And in that sense, we have almost, at least from the 2022-2023 data, we have almost 408,000 that were identified in that category. We have 407,904 according to our PEAMS data for that. And that was the 22-23 school year. So we do have, like I said, kind of another indicator or collection of students identified with dyslexia and whether that's served under 504 or special education. And that's again around the 22-23 school year. We've got about almost 174,000 that are currently identified with dyslexia and are on a 504 accommodation plan. So that could be obviously a variety of reasons for that accommodation plan. They could be just receiving instructional and access accommodations. We do have some students who are currently receiving dyslexia instruction under section 504. Those of you who are familiar with the bill, with House Bill 3928, that is transitioning to basically all students who receive dyslexia instruction will be served under special education. So data, at least on the numbers, not necessarily on the impairments that are identified that qualify them, with the exception of dyslexia having, because that's sort of an additional collection that is asked.
So the data collected are, one, if a student is being served under a 504, and then a subset of that data is whether or not they are a student with dyslexia being served under a 504 as opposed to special education.
Right, it's kind of two set. I say subset. It is two entirely different indicators, like two entirely PEAMS data elements in terms of what we collect. But yes, so essentially we can map out, those when schools are inputting data for students identified with dyslexia. That subset kind of a question there is, are they served 504 or are they served special education? Whereas kind of our indicator for 504 is simply, do they have a 504 plan? So you basically kind of map out that particular collection to figure out how students are served. One of the reasons behind that is because we specifically have a dyslexia allotment in Chapter 48 of the Education Code. So that's why we specifically have to collect data associated with the identification of dyslexia for the generation of that allotment.
So other than whether a student is being served under 504 or not, is there any additional data that is collected about, how long, for instance, the age distribution of those students, or what accommodations are being provided, anything like that, or is it just 504 or no?
I couldn't unmute for a second. It is essentially, you can bring other data elements to try to map out certain demographics or characteristics of a student, but nothing associated with their either disability or impairment or the accommodations that are provided within a 504 plan. That's not collected now.
Okay, because I think when, I don't know if it was Justin or you, in the past have reported the special education data. I think there's been some distribution about, what grade they were in, their gender, race, that sort of thing, to kind of show some of that. So what you're saying is that in theory, an analysis could be done cross-referencing that data with the 504 data, but it hasn't been done.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you definitely can pull, race, age, grade level, that type of thing, because that's, just the general kind of data collection anyway. So you can disaggregate and, within certain characteristics, but as far as the actual kind of disability related provision of services, whether it's, for what impairment or, what accommodations are provided, that's not currently collected through 504.
And in a similar way, would there be any way to determine if students are the rate at which they're going from a 504 to special education, or where they're going from special education services back to 504, that sort of thing? I'm just trying to get there at the interplay of our students being kind of moved back and forth, or are you kind of in one or the other, and you pretty much stay that way throughout your education, K through 12 education?
I mean, I don't know if there is a very direct line of sight into that. However, I think that I mean, you rarely get sort of the back and forth piece. I mean, it happens, but you rarely get kind of, if you're identified with a disability and are being served under special education, if you no longer need that specially designed instruction, you could transition out to be sort of protected through the access of an accommodation plan under 504. So it does occur that potentially a student could again demonstrate that need later on down the road and be served under special education. Doesn't happen a ton, but as far as I think our largest area in which we will see that section 504 sort of transition over to special education is through the dyslexia lens. I think that's been the biggest shift in the last 10 years or so. And so it's been moving that direction for several years. And I think, with the passage of 3928, it will essentially all move that direction.
Okay, and one last question. I think we've seen sort of the special education rate tracked year by year, kind of that bar chart. And do you have a similar bar chart for number or percentage of students, or both, hopefully, number or percentage of students with that are provided a 504?
I do not, but I can get one. Like it
Okay.
wouldn't be, it wouldn't be that difficult to do. So I can definitely get that for you.
Okay, yeah, if you have one that sort of compares the percentages and numbers, and then if you have the more up to, and I probably have an old one, but if you have an updated one that has special education there, just to be able to look at those side by side.
Sure.
Particularly interested in rate of change over time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. In terms, I know I have it for special education. It's as you said, we kind of put those charts out fairly frequently. But yeah, so of 22-23, we've have about 12.8% of the student population identified as receiving special education services. But I'll do that same thing for 504 and let you know for sure.
All right, thank you, Kristen.
Sure, of course.
Kristen, I have a question. This is Jamie. Is there any data on what type of programs people are using, school districts are using to teach dyslexia? because I know that I was in a training last week with Region 1, and there was a lot of confusion within teachers and districts, and some of them are using Lexia as the main program for dyslexia, which is not direct instruction, which is not what the dyslexia handbook specifies. So there was a lot of confusion in regards to that. Can you give me some information in regards to that?
There is not any statewide, at this point, analysis of what LEAs are using because, or school districts and charter schools are using, because that isn't a requirement for them to submit to us. We did issue a request for information a few months ago, still sort of consolidating that data, but we did put out a request for information just from anyone who wanted to provide information if they did have a reading intervention or evidence-based reading program for dyslexia. We were just collecting information from certain companies and vendors that so that we could see who like basically conduct a landscape analysis of what's out there. So we did put that out a few months ago, or several months ago, I guess, and are kind of consolidating what we received on that. So the only thing I necessarily have access to at this point is just kind of, companies who've said that that their programs meet the requirements of the handbook. I do anticipate that when the State Board of Education does meet to revise their dyslexia handbook here in the coming months, that will be a conversation in terms of, we have the requirements listed in the handbook. At this point, school districts and charter schools are required to, their instruction programs must meet those requirements in the handbook. But at this point in time, there is no kind of essential sort of reporting requirement or a list, so to speak, of those who truly do meet those requirements. And so I do anticipate that will be a conversation, at least with the State Board of Education, is, how are we ensuring that, that the programs that are used are meeting those standards. But at this point, there isn't really a mechanism to see what districts are using at this point. It's a good question. Anybody else have any questions for me?
Yes, this is Kevin from TWC. I had one follow-up question on the 504 data. What is the age range for that data, or is it a range by grade, or how is that?
We can get it by grade. Yeah, at this point, that number I gave you, the 400,000, is just total population of pre-K through grade 12. But we could definitely disaggregate it by grade if you think that would be helpful.
No, I was just curious as to how how that data point was, what the range of that data point was. So it does include pre-K as well?
I think so. I'll double check, but I think that's pre-K through grade 12. But I can definitely double check, especially when I get the longitudinal chart for Aaron.
Good deal. Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Kristen, I've got a question. This is Joanne. I'm a parent volunteer. So since TEA is not really enforcing, the research-based programs, is there any thought to TEA at least looking to see that at least the districts at least have a number of certified reading interventionalists? Maybe looking at it that way.
So I do want to preface that it's not necessarily that we're not monitoring it, because there is a provision in state law that does say that the agency does monitor dyslexia, programming and that type of thing. So during districts and charter schools sort of cyclical monitoring processes, they also receive kind of a dyslexia program monitoring review as well. So there is that component of the review and process. So it's just not necessarily that doesn't result then in a collection of, well, these districts are using this program and these districts are using this program. It's essentially an individual kind of review of, show me your artifacts of that you've, that you've taught the program with fidelity, who are your students, that type of thing. And so making sure when they have that monitoring review that they are, abiding by the dyslexia program. So there is the component of the, checks and balances from that end. At this point in time, and again, that could be something that the State Board of Education discusses, but at this point in time, the statute and the handbook essentially just require that provider of dyslexia instruction be, fully trained in whatever the district's program is. So that, of course, best practice, ideally, we want the most highly trained individuals in those positions, which would, include your licensed dyslexia therapists and your, certified academic language therapists. There is no legal requirement to have those. The statute essentially says as if the person is trained in the, fully trained in the district's program and instructional materials related to that program, then they are allowed to provide that dyslexia instruction. So that has been a topic, for quite a few years, too, as far as, kind of a minimum level of, of training. What does that look like? Obviously, different programs have, different, kind of complexities around their training. So at this point, we would not be, we wouldn't be authorized to require sort of a minimum standard, but, it could be something I think that the state board considers when they're, in their revisions to the handbook about whether they, want to make some kind of, statement or rule around that. I anticipate, obviously the State Board of Education does have to revise their handbook because of this bill. And that has to be done by the end of June in 2024. So they've got, they have a meeting in November, and then somewhere around, January-ish, and then also April, because they meet quarterly. So I would definitely, see what those next few meetings bring as well.
Kristen, is there any recommendation as far as how many students are served at the same time? I know there was a school district, because I was in a meeting that had 16 students from kinder all the way to 6th grade. And I've been an interventionist for such a long time that group is too big to actually help the students.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I mean, and part of the requirements of choosing an evidence-based dyslexia program is to teach that program with fidelity. And so, I would anticipate, I can't think of any situations in which a program would not have some kind of, statement around what the recommended group size is around, to be able to teach that program with fidelity. So that is, that is something that I have heard, a couple of those kind of instances is what about group size? And so I think it's, at this point, it's the district, essentially what the state board rule, requires is that they develop or purchase a reading program that meets the requirements of the handbook, and that they teach that program with fidelity. And so, it is something that kind of sort of transpired from House Bill 3928, and that's in our, agency FAQ document, is essentially, you've had this long, basically saying, okay, districts, you've had this long-standing requirement to develop or purchase this program. You should be able to, easily, either, hand over or describe what are those components of fidelity for that particular program. So within your program, you should be able to discuss what is the group size recommendation, what is the, scope and sequence and that type of thing. And so that is something we're still kind of working on in terms of exactly the reason why there isn't, there's kind of every district sort of is able to choose their own. That is a little bit difficult to ensure that those components are well known, among their community as far as what those fidelity components are.
I just wanted to make a comment. Sorry, this being my first time, I wasn't completely prepared as to what we were going to experience. But I mean, in my experience, the last time I looked at the handbook, it did say that there is a stipulation on the group sizes in the handbook. I believe it was under 6, and yeah, most programs will say that as well. It seems that this whole conversation it's the chicken or the egg. Is it the program that's defining what the instructor needs to be, or is it the instructor qualification that's defining what program needs to be used? So like to see that kind of conversation with the handbook and how that is going to play out, because those are the two most important pieces, and it's the chicken or the egg. So we're kind of chasing ourselves back and forth.
Always. Yep. Always with this subject too. Yep. Thanks, Tara.
Kristen, I have a quick question or a comment. So knowing, section 504, and that's not just the dyslexia, it's much more than that. When you're looking at numbers and statistics, those numbers fluctuate, right, throughout the school year, because some 504 placements are temporary placements, correct?
As far as 504, I mean, you could have a situation in which you have students who, may have a temporary condition like a broken arm or something, that you go ahead and develop a 504 accommodation plan. You wouldn't necessarily have to if it's a temporary impairment. The regs don't say you don't have to, but in those sense, if you basically, so you could have a situation in which you have a temporary, like a broken arm, broken ankle, you need to use the elevator because, you have a broken ankle or something. And so a district could develop a 504 accommodation plan for that. And that would be, a temporary thing. But generally, with 504 accommodation plans, yes, you could have situations where students completely don't need the access or instructional accommodations anymore, but generally you don't see a lot of temporary, like you don't see a ton of like exit from 504, if that's what you're asking. I think it's it's not a since it's more of a kind of access and an access statute, as far as just ensuring the same access as non-disabled peers, that it's generally throughout most of a student's educational career.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I know we could talk a lot, especially about dyslexia, because that's always a conversation that generates hours of discussion. But I will get more information around the section 504 numbers for you, and in the format that Aaron and Kevin were requesting, just so you have that data. I'll also provide just to have, so that you can have kind of the special education data as well, just so you can have to kind of more updated slides on both of those populations. But Stephanie can let me know if you guys need anything else, and I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you for those of you who are new to the committee, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Appreciate you being here and appreciate your time.
This is Aaron. I don't know if this is an Amy question, a Stephanie question, or a Kristen question. So Kristen referred to HB 3928 a few times. Is that something we're going to talk about later in terms of what's actually in that bill, what it requires? And Kristen mentioned a couple other ones as well. Are we going to cover kind of like what's in store based on those bills passing later in the meeting, or is that something where somebody has a sort of a.
Do you mean
Cliff
like the
notes version of what
rule
this does.
changes that we're gonna need to make, or do you just mean generally, like what did the bills do that we need to know about?
Just what the bill's requiring TA to do, or those sorts of things, or
Sure.
whomever
Well,
to do.
yeah, well, let me at least, I'll put in the chat our the page that has all the HB 3928 info, just so you can look at that. And there is an FAQ, and we're in the middle of updating that as well. So
Okay.
that I think is probably a helpful step in reading about House Bill 3928. The others that have generated some rule changes or some actions, what I'll do for that, and I'm sure that, you know, that will be sort of, even if it's not an agenda item, I'm sure will be sort of indirectly related to your conversations about, you know, future legislative reports too. But I'll go ahead and send Stephanie some information about, you know, particular bills I mentioned and kind of what the actions are from those. And then as we get into some rule drafting and that kind of thing, we'll bring that back to you guys as well.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate, well, when we get into the rules part, we'll be able to provide some thought and input and feedback to that. I just
Yeah.
more just, this is more just a educational thing, which rules that are on our radar for that are going to necessitate rule changes or program updates or those sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, I would start on that page with House Bill 3928, and then I'll provide Stephanie some other links for you guys to check out before we then kind of talk about next steps with rules.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay,
Perfect. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, Amy, if you're looking at your agenda, I think the next thing you want to do is public comments.
Yes. I know that we have at least one in the room. Stephanie, did you get any requests via the chat that I did not get?
I haven't gotten any via chat, no.
Okay. Well, would you like to read the guidelines for public comments?
Sure. They're on the agenda. If you're not familiar with where to find them, public comments may be presented in person or via Zoom. Anyone interested in making a public comment must inform the chair between 9 and 9:30 of the intent to give public comments. The public comment period will begin once the updates from TEA are completed and will last no more than 30 minutes. Each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, and speakers will be heard in the order that they signed up. Individuals who wish to provide written comments to the CAC during the meeting should email copies of the written comments to the CAC mailbox at cac.tea.texas.gov before the meeting so that it can be distributed to the committee members. As many speakers as possible will be heard within the comment period. A speaker who signs up by the deadline but is unable to speak will be given the opportunity to speak first at the next meeting. The CAC chair may ask individuals who wish to speak on the same topic to consolidate their comments. There you have it.
Okay. Stephen, would you like to give public comment?
Yeah. I'm going to keep my mic off.
What? We can't hear him, Amy.
They can't hear you on Zoom.
Get a squealing noise. Good morning. This is Stephen Alamon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Very good. Okay. Well, I am Stephen Alamon with an organization called Disability Rights Texas. Disability Rights Texas is the protection and advocacy agency for people with disabilities in this state. We attempt to advance the legal rights of people with disabilities in any number of settings, including public schools. I'm going to touch upon 3 topics this morning in my brief time: dyslexia, the changes by Senate Bill 133, and special education funding. With regard to dyslexia, 4 weeks from today, the State Board of Education will have its next meeting, and on the agenda of that meeting is the dyslexia handbook and their dyslexia regulations. I would strongly encourage this committee to post on its next meeting agenda the specific topic of the dyslexia handbook as it affects students with disabilities in special education. I think there is an intersection here for you to be involved in that review by the State Board of Ed and potentially take your own action to provide official comments back to the State Board of Ed before that work is concluded next year. Again, I would strongly encourage you to next board meeting to post as an action item possible comments on the dyslexia handbook updates and regulations by State Board of Ed. Secondly, I want to comment on Senate Bill 133. Senate Bill 133 is a new piece of legislation that affects the use of restraint and other techniques against students in public schools in 5th grade and below. There's a very important clause, however, in that bill that refers to an exception, if you will, and that is with regard to students who pose a serious risk of harm to the student or another person. It is our belief at Disability Rights Texas that that phrase needs to be clarified and not left to the judgment of every teacher and administrator in Texas. We would strongly encourage this committee to again publicly post on its agenda for action and its next meeting comments and guidance for TEA to consider in its own rulemaking on this topic, which you just heard will happen, about what do we mean by this phrase that a student poses a serious risk of harm to himself or another person. It's important that we have clarification and clarity across the state. Otherwise, this important piece of legislation will have no meaning whatsoever if it's subject to every teacher's interpretation. Finally, I want to talk about special education funding. I'm going to post into the chat a link to the report of the Texas Commission on Special Ed Funding. For the new members of the committee, there has been a tremendous amount of work by advocates and stakeholders over the last several years about improving financial support in our public schools for special education. There is a commission report that is still awaiting action by the Texas legislature. As mentioned, I am actively working to try to get some of those recommendations adopted in this third special session as an advocate active at the Capitol. But that being said, I would strongly encourage this committee once again in consideration of your next legislative report to consider to advance and advocate the ideas in that commission report that you think are worth continuing to pursue. Because to be frank, it's unlikely in this third special session that we'll get everything accomplished around the needed reforms in our financial system to support school districts in their services to students with disabilities. So your attention in your own report about the continuing need for improvements would go a long way to making that day ultimately come. Again, I'll put a link in the chat of that commission report for the benefit of all members, new and old, as a reminder, and that may serve as a basis for your own discussion and I hope action in including those topics in your next report. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions other than me? Because I have a question. My question is, Stephen, can you provide us a written copy of those comments? Because there were a lot of future agenda items in that, and I think it would be good for us to have a copy of that so we can remember to put everything on the agenda for next time.
So I am aware that the CAC at least at one point had an email address. I'll be happy to email that address with a summary of my comments, is particularly my call for action items by this committee for its future meetings. And if not, I'll CC someone to make sure you ultimately get those, Amy.
Stephen, you can send those to it's cac@tea.texas.gov, but you can also CC Amy on it. That would be very helpful.
Very good.
Stephen, I have a question. This is Aaron. So you mentioned the State Board of Education has the dyslexia handbook on its November agenda. So are they making a final decision about updating the handbook, or is that just they're considering what changes they need to make?
Sure. So, as you may know, the State Board of Education is a separate body and has its own rulemaking authority separate from the Commissioner of Education. And in our state, what's somewhat unique about students with dyslexia is that both the Commissioner of Education and the State Board of Education has jurisdiction. The State Board of Education had a meeting in August of this year in which they had this item on their agenda. They took public comment. Disability Rights Texas, as well as several other organizations, provided public comment. This was post-legislative action, but pre-administrative action by them. So they were sort of gathering the temperature of the field, if you will. That happened in their August meeting. Now, my understanding of what will happen, although it's not yet publicly posted, is that the November meeting, again, 4 weeks from today, is when that meeting will begin. The Committee on Instruction, which is a group of members of the State Board of Ed, will gather, and they will officially authorize a rulemaking to update the dyslexia handbook, as well as corresponding regulations that they have around dyslexia. So that will start a rulemaking process in which this is their last meeting this calendar year, November 2023. My understanding is that they will return in late January 2024 and then review public comments and then perhaps take final action, or at least further revise their rule. As you heard, they have some time to act, and they have several meetings scheduled, already planned out. So over the course of probably the next 2 to 3 meetings, dyslexia will be an active agenda item at the State Board of Ed. But again, my understanding is in November, their meeting will address authorizing rulemaking around official changes to the handbook and their own rules, sort of kicking off the official public comment period.
I know, is that basically sort of a notice of proposed rulemaking they'll be putting out? Is at least the term at the federal level I'm familiar with, where they say, here's what we want to do. What are your thoughts?
Essentially, yes. In terms of rulemaking, as we all probably know, there has to be sort of an official proposal, if you will, officially published. That will be in a state government document called the Texas Register. That's the official notice to the public. And there is a public comment period. State Board of Ed and the Committee on Instruction will also at some point take public comment on that, and then potentially revise their proposal at some point. Then that will ultimately lead to a final adoption of some new edition of the dyslexia handbook in 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for Stephen? If not, I propose we take a 10-minute break while we set up for our work on our report. So that would mean we would be back at 10:09.